All right, let's get right into it. When we talk about really difficult, even toxic relationships, the story we usually tell is pretty simple. There's a villain and there's a victim. But for this explainer, we are going to look at this whole dynamic through a completely different lens. We're going to reframe this not as a battle between two people, but as the shared story of a wound that happened a long, long time ago, back in childhood. So let's just start with this one, kind of provocative question. What if those two roles we see so clearly, the person who controls and the person who submits, aren't actually two different people at their core? What if they're just two different survival strategies that grew from the exact same traumatic root? I mean, that's a question that just changes everything, right? It changes how we think about blame, and way more importantly, how we think about healing. So to really unpack this, we're going to follow a clear path. First, we'll look at that painful cycle that I think many of us can recognize. Then we're going to go deeper into how trauma can literally split a child's perception of reality. We'll look at the incredible way the psyche fragments itself just to survive. Then see how these two opposite roles are really just two sides of the same coin. And finally, we'll look at the path to becoming whole again. Okay, so let's start at the surface, the part we can actually see. This is the dynamic that is so common, yet so deeply, deeply misunderstood. This is where so much of the pain and confusion in adult relationships comes from. I bet this dynamic looks pretty familiar. On one side, you've got a pattern of someone who needs power, who needs to be in control, but this isn't about being a bad person. It's a desperate, desperate attempt to avoid a terrifying inner emptiness, a fear of just being obliterated. And on the other side, you've got this pattern of appeasing, of people-pleasing, and that's not weakness. It's a deep, primal need to be chosen, to be made safe, to avoid this crushing sense of shame. You see, both are survival patterns, not character flaws. Now, this is where things get really confusing, and it's why these cycles are just so hard to break. The roles can actually flip. As each person's core wounds get poked, the one who appeases can suddenly seem reactive and totally unstable, and the one who controls can start to look like a victim who's under attack. It creates this fog of confusion, and the blame game just gets deeper and deeper, with each person absolutely convinced the other one is the problem. Okay, so to really get how this cycle even starts, we have to go back. Way back. We need to look at the very first layer of this wound, which is how a child's basic understanding of reality can literally be fractured by trauma. And this brings us to a huge concept, cognitive dissonance. Now, in this context, it's not just a fancy term, it's a profound survival mechanism. I mean, just imagine being a little kid whose only source of survival, their parent, their caregiver, is also the source of terrifying harm. A child's brain it can't hold both of those truths at once. It's a neurological impossibility. So what does the brain do to survive? It does something absolutely brilliant. It splits reality. It has to. It has to basically pick a version of reality that allows them to stay attached to that caregiver, because attachment means life. This isn't a defect, it's an incredible adaptation. The child has to deny their own experience of being harmed just to stay connected. So reality is now split. But how in the world does the psyche even manage that? How does it function? Well, let's peel back another layer and look at the core tool the brain uses to live inside this fractured new world. And that tool is called structural dissociation. It's this amazing ability the psyche has to just split off or compartmentalize different parts of our experience. The overwhelming feelings, the terrifying memories, even whole parts of our identity. And the most important thing to get here is that this is not a disorder. It is a highly adaptive survival skill that is designed to help a person stay functional when things are absolutely impossible. Now, according to this theory, the personality divides into at least two kinds of parts. On one hand, you've got what's called the apparent normal part. You can just think of this as the going on with normal life self. Its whole job is to manage the day-to-day, go to school, do homework, appear normal to everyone else. But on the other side, you have the emotional part. And this is the part that holds all that unprocessed trauma. It's essentially frozen in time, stuck in those memories of fear and overwhelm and that desperate, desperate need for attachment. Okay, so now we have all the pieces on the table. We see the painful dynamic, we understand the split in reality, and we know about the fragmentation that happens to survive. Now let's get to the very heart of this explainer and see how this all connects those two people we started with back to one single traumatic origin. This right here, this is the whole thing. The patterns we call anxious attachment or codependency, and the patterns we call avoidant attachment or narcissism, they are not separate things. They exist on a spectrum. They are just two different ways of expressing the exact same underlying survival strategy, structural dissociation that started way back in early childhood. And what's so fascinating is how these different patterns often start with different roles in the family. You might have the golden child who's praised but maybe also controlled or violated. They might learn that they have to control reality to avoid that feeling of being wiped out. For them, the real truth feels like a violation of that necessary control. Then you have the scapegoat, the one who's blamed for everything. They might learn that the only way to find safety is to just appease, to take the blame. For them, telling the truth about their abuser feels like death because it could sever their only attachment. If you want to boil it all down to its absolute essence, it's this. One adaptation learns to push all of its pain, its confusion, its shame outward, onto the world. And the other adaptation learns to turn all of that same pain, confusion, and shame inward, onto itself. Two different strategies for the same unbearable feelings. So you see, the crucial point here is that when we look at these dynamics, we are not seeing a villain and a victim. We are seeing children who were harmed. We're seeing these brilliant survival strategies that are now just causing pain in their adult lives. And when you look at it from that perspective, well, the goal isn't blame, is it? It's freedom. And it's really important to remember this all exists on a spectrum. In the most extreme cases, when the trauma is chronic and starts very, very early in childhood, this protective fragmentation of the personality can become even more complex. And that's when it may develop into what's clinically known as dissociative identity disorder, or DID. All right, this brings us to our final and honestly the most hopeful part of this whole journey. If fragmentation was the brilliant way to survive, then integration is the path toward healing. So let's talk about what it actually means to become whole again. The first thing to get is that healing is not about trying to erase the past or get back to some fantasy of being normal. It's about something so much more profound. It's about gently, compassionately making contact with those parts of yourself that had to be split off, that had to be exiled, just so you could survive. It's a process of building a relationship with yourself. So what does that path actually look like? Well, it starts by just noticing, learning to identify these different internal voices, these different survival reactions, but without judging them, just with curiosity. From there, it's all about building safety on the inside, creating an internal environment where those traumatized parts can finally start to feel safe. A huge piece of this is reconnecting your mind and your body, so that stored trauma can finally be processed. And then, ultimately, it's about gently helping those parts that are stuck in the past to understand that the trauma is over, that they are safe now. And this quote just beautifully captures the natural result of that work. See, the psyche is always moving toward wholeness. Once that internal system feels safe enough that it doesn't need to be split anymore, it just starts to reorganize all by itself. This isn't about forcing anything. It's just about creating the right conditions for the mind's own natural healing intelligence to take over. So, if we step back and look at the whole picture, the tragedy is so clear. These are not broken adults. They are harmed children who, through absolutely no fault of their own, lost access to their true, whole selves. But the hope is just as clear. That connection was never actually destroyed. It was just lost. And with compassion and understanding, it absolutely can be restored. And so I want to leave you with this question to really sit with. What changes? What changes in our relationships, in our world, and most importantly, inside of ourselves when we make this one fundamental shift, when we move from judgment and blame to curiosity and compassion, when we stop asking, what is wrong with you? And instead, we gently ask, what happened to you? In the end, all of these painful dynamics are really a story about the dance between power and love. That will to power always shows up where love and safety were missing. And so the path to healing for ourselves and for each other is that journey back to a place where love can finally rule.